Calvin Castine, just a little bit south of Riley Ford on Route 9 in beautiful downtown Chazy. It's the first day of September 2012, and we are gathered here in a location with a historic marker that indicates this is the location of the Scott home. 1814 British headquarters in Chazy Village under the General Prevost with a staff of 10 officers prior to the Battle of Plattsburgh. We are gathering here with a group of interested Chazy residents, some other folks from out the area, and some people who have marched from Dewey Tavern to get here. And we're going to find out all about that as Bob Cheeseman gets us underway here very shortly.
Good evening, everyone. I'm really glad to see so many people here. We're really blessed today with this nice day that we've been having, so we have been able to make good use of it. In case anybody doesn't know me, my name's Bob Cheeseman. I'm the town of Chazy historian. We are here to dedicate this marker with the help of our reenactors. We have descendant of a man that was here during 1812 from that lived in Chazy, and we have descendants of one of the officers that marched through here. Pete Hubble is the Chazy resident descendant. It was his great-great-grandfather and grandmother that lived here and had dealings with the British as they came through, such as they were. Roy Carter and Joe Carter are from England, and Joe is a descendant of Colonel James Willington, who marched through here and went on to the battle the battle at Culver Hill. What we're going to do now is to have Pete Hubble lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and for the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Pete. We now will have our first speaker, a man we don't need to introduce too much, but a man that leads us every day in our town activities. The Honorable Mr. Staub Spiegel, our town supervisor.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody here to Chazy to our memorial for the Battle of Plattsburgh. We have a beautiful day today. I'd like to tell these gentlemen that you are better men than I am for two reasons. Number one, they just walked all the way from Dewey's Tavern near Champlain, Ross's Point area. And the second reason you're better than I am, because you walked all that distance and you didn't go straight to the Weathercock and have a beer. You're better men than we are. I'd love to thank Mr. Cheeseman. He's done so much work for this event today. Kit Booth, all the Battle of Plattsburgh committee. People don't realize how many hours and hours they put in to have such events. and they do a fantastic job. So can we give him and Mr. Booth and the committee a round of applause, please? Thank you. I mean, we're here to remember today, it was almost 200 years ago, September 11th, 1814, when the British came down from Canada and were heading to Plattsburgh and actually came into Chazy and took over a lot of our town, most of the houses along the way. And it was General George Provost, I'm sorry about that, couldn't remember his last name, who took over this house way back then. And obviously he liked this home. At that time it was only about 2 years old. Home was recently built. And it's something that we have to remember. Today we want to thank Kim and Tim Howley. They own this facility now and they work on it constantly. We hope that it's here another 200 years from now. They've done a great job. They continually work on it, and Tim loves to work on it every day because, well, you get to sneak over next door too once in a while, right, Timmy? But they're doing a great job. Once again, I'm just a welcoming committee, but I would like to take a moment to remember all the people that have taken their lives for our freedom. So we could bow our heads for a second. Thank you very much, and I hope everybody enjoys this event, and we will turn it back to Bob for the next speaker. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Roy Carter, the man from England. Roy is an excellent historian, and he's done an awful lot of research on the War of 1812, and I suppose other things too, but he shared with us a lot of the findings. So I give you Mr. Roy Carter.
Well, it seems as though I've drawn the short straw today in order to give you some feel for the British troops that were marching through here on their way to Plattsburgh. If Bob had asked me to do this about a year ago, I'd have really been in trouble. I'd have had to just stand up and say, here I am, thank you very much, and go home. Because the British Army records of the regiments that passed through this place don't say very much about the Battle of Plattsburgh at all. In fact, apart from a couple of them, the rest say nothing. Plattsburgh doesn't register. And you have to realise this is against the background of the war, the Peninsular War in France, Portugal and Spain, where they fought and lost many, many men. However, nonetheless, here I am, and in the intervening period between last year and now, I have in fact come across 2 or 3 pieces of significant information which I'm pretty sure that people haven't yet heard about. So what I'm going to do this afternoon is try and set the scene and then introduce this information at the appropriate time. So to do this, I've really got to march, sorry fellas, I've got to march the British Army back to beyond the Canadian border. I think we've got time. And start from where Prevost created or got his army organised. And in fact it was one division, and it was called the Left Division, and it was comprised of 3 brigades, and the division was in fact commanded by a chap who was virtually anonymous in this campaign called General de Rottenberg. However, the brigades were commanded by 3 major generals from the British Army in France. They'd come over to Canada to be specifically part of this operation, and their names were Brisbane, Power and Robinson. Robinson's quite an interesting character because he in fact was born about 100 miles or so south of here into a very wealthy loyalist family. In fact, they owned about 60,000 acres of what is now, I think, Dutchess County, a garrison opposite West Point. However, they picked the wrong side in the War of Independence and lost a lot. Robinson became a young officer in the British Army and continued to serve right the way through Plattsburgh and beyond. Each of the brigades consisted typically of 4 regiments, and for regiment you can also read battalion. Two of the brigades were composed of completely Peninsular veterans. These were hard and tough guys who had fought in Spain and been sent to Canada to take part in this operation. And they were commanded by Robinson and Power. Now the other chap, Brisbane, who was an interesting character because he was not only a great soldier, but he was a world-class mathematician and astronomer. And he became the governor of New South Wales, and the city of Brisbane in Queensland is named after him. So his name lives on in Australia. They were also regarded by Wellington, their commander in France and the Peninsula, as the best of their kind in the British Army. So these guys really knew what they were doing and were first-class leaders of men. But the Peninsula veterans were really teed off. They didn't really want to be here. They'd had years of fighting and a hard slog against the French in Spain and Portugal. And then they were told, well, we're going to put you on a boat and send you off to Canada because we've got some business for you there. And this, as you can imagine, wasn't received with any great pleasure. And in the words of the song, I think it goes something like, over the hill and far away, King George commands and we obey. I think there's probably another line to that song, and as we grouse, have a good grouse as we march away. But nonetheless, they were here, and they were now organised into this particular division. So they entered America, they crossed over on the 1st of September, and they entered Champagne. They weren't in fact prevented at all. It was virtually undefended. So they marched into Champagne and there they stayed for the day, for a couple of days. Now, it's generally thought, and I thought this for a long time, that the plan had always been that one of the brigades, Brisbane's brigade as it happened, would go down what I've called the Lake Shore Road. And the other 2 brigades would in fact come through Chazy, then split south of Chazy and carry on towards Plattsburgh. Well, I found an account by the brigade major of Brisbane's brigade, and it's quite interesting to know that he tells us that this wasn't the case. The plan was initially to follow the old Burgoyne route, where the entire British Army would march down the Lakeshore Road through Dead Creek and into Plattsburgh. Now, when Brisbane got to hear about this, he wasn't too sure, and in fact he thought that it was an injudicious idea, because he was aware of the difficulties of the route, and he also knew that the enemy was preparing to receive the British at Dead Creek. Now that poses the question, how would he know this? I mean, they'd only just arrived in Champlain. Well, it's pretty certain that he got the information from a man called Joe Ackley, who was a British agent living in Plattsburgh. And he was, in fact, Brisbane later said, and I quote, "The conduct of Mr. Joel Ackley, who acted as a guide to my brigade on the expedition to Plattsburgh, was such as met my entire approbation, he being indefatigable in ascertaining the situation, force and movements of the enemy on that occasion. So here we have a British agent that was living in Plattsburgh coming up here and giving the British all this information that they needed. Now, given this information, this brigade major, a man called Campbell, was given some flank companies, they were probably light infantry, a squad of Indians, and told by Brisbane and Prevost, can you find another route to the right? And so he tells us that this group explored the road between Champlain and Plattsburgh, and this was about the 2nd or 3rd of September, without apparently being accosted along the way. And he says, if I can quote once again, that he marched by what he called the Bateman Road, which of course was the Beekmantown Road, and very soon found that it was fit for military purpose as far as Plattsburgh. Now, as I say, there must have been probably a couple of hundred soldiers who left Champlain, got all the way virtually to the outskirts of Plattsburgh, and were able to come back again and tell Brisbane and Prevost, well, yeah, there is a route. So, at about daybreak on the 6th of September, the British Army up sticks here in Chazy, but with one exception. They left behind a regiment, the 39th Foot, and they remained in Chazy until the British came marching back again about 5 days later. Now they had again their light division, their light company detached, and interesting enough, they had 100 men volunteered to become Marines and sailors aboard the British ships and gunboats that were light of men. So this guy was a colour sergeant probably in the British Army, and suddenly found himself as a Marine on board one of these gunboats, which had to be rowed all the way down to Plattsburgh and back again to take fire. The force that left here totaled about 9,500 infantry, plus supporting artillery and a small troop of cavalry. And just south of Plattsburgh, as was agreed by this new plan, Brisbane's lot moved to the east and down to the Lakeshore Road. The other two brigades, in fact, carried on and eventually were on the Beekmantown Road heading towards Culver Hill. Power's brigade was in the lead of about maybe 3,500 men, and coming behind him at some distance was Robinson's now demi-brigade, because he'd left the 88th at Champlain, he'd left the 39th here in Chazy, and now he'd got maybe 1,300 soldiers, and off they went. When they were approaching Culver Hill, as you know, they were confronted by a small force of American regulars and militiamen, which really, to this professional army, wasn't in fact much of a problem. They just brushed them aside, and I think you'll find that McComb says they didn't even bother to take their packs off. And they brushed them aside, but not before, as already been mentioned, Lieutenant Colonel Willington, that was leading the light troops that were screening this body of 3,000 or 4,000 infantry, was killed by, it said, as he was leading his men on. And like many of the officers in the British Army at that time, they were now come on people rather than go on. In other words, they led from the front and not from the rear. And he turned to urge his men forward, and he was shot in the neck by a Peru militia and was killed outright. and he now is commemorated on that lovely memorial in the park at Culver Hill. So they weren't in fact bothered by this attempt by the Americans to stall them, so they kept marching on, and they arrived at Hall's Corner, and Power's mob then were again attacked by a small force of American regulars and militia, who retired in face of the force that confronted them. And thus the British arrived in Plattsburgh by this route on the 6th, in the afternoon of the 6th of September. The Brisbane's lot countered some resistance on the way, and in fact at one stage they were shelled by some of McDonough's gunboats that were in the bay, but it didn't seem to hold them up too much. So now we've got the British Army located on the western side of the Saranac with the Americans on the eastern side. And as far as the British Army was concerned, it was just, apart from taking a few pot shots at the Americans on the other side of the river, they just hung around doing virtually nothing for 5 days, waiting for the British fleet, which had not been completed when they left Canada, to arrive in Plattsburgh Bay and confront MacDonald's fleet. Well, you all know what happened then, that very much to their surprise and huge disappointment, the disgruntled British soldiers were told to head back to Canada. And so on the 11th of 12th of September they started heading north. They were undefeated. They'd hardly been in action, and they were retiring on Prevost's orders. So here we go again, you know, Prevost commands and we obey. They weren't very happy about it, but they just turned around and headed back to Canada. And this, of course, followed the total annihilation of the British fleet by Macdonough on Plattsburgh Bay. They were captured. So as far as that was concerned, Prevost said there was no point in staying in Plattsburgh, we might as well all go home. And that's effectively what they did. And they marched back up here and they marched through Chazy. And at this point, there were 13, I think it was, 13 men of the 49th that belonged to Brisbane's division. They weren't Peninsulars, they'd been British soldiers serving in Canada. Decided Chazy looks a nice place to live in, and to hell with this damn lot, we'll just stay here. So they deserted and remained in Chazy, where they were probably well looked after, knowing the hospitality that exists in your wonderful town. And their names, in fact, Bob has got a list of their names, so if you feel like it, you may like to look at them and see if any of you are related to this mob that tried to, conquer this area. But to give you some idea of the reason why perhaps the British regimental histories, and for that matter our general histories, don't have anything much to say at all about Plattsburgh and the War of 1812, that the official, and I'll read, the official British casualty figures, including deserters, for the entire Plattsburgh campaign total 438. 35 killed, 46 wounded, 73 prisoners and 234 deserters. Yeah, 157 of the latter came from Brisbane's brigade, and there was Brisbane's brigade composed of 3 regular British Army regiments that had been serving in Canada, a couple of Canadian units, the Voltigeurs and one other, and a load of Swiss soldiers that were attached to the British Army. And most of the deserters came from that unit. The Demurons, the Swiss people, and the other British regiments. So there you have it. There was, as I say, 157 deserters that stayed around. What happened to them, I don't know. Their records are not available in the British Record Office. But there was another interesting part, in fact, that the 39th who were based here, none of them deserted. They all returned to Canada. And none of the deserters, in fact, came from the Peninsular troops. Even though they were teed off to be here, I think they'd rather, go back and have a nice voyage with the air over the Atlantic back to the UK, or so we think. However, so I can't give you any anecdotes or any stories from the British histories because they just don't exist, except in one case. And this is from a British soldier. He was probably a colour sergeant in the 39th Foot, and I've already mentioned him. He was one of these mobs that was volunteered to serve as Marines and seamen, and he in fact served on the British gunboat, the General Simcoe. And they returned to Chazy landing at about 10 or 11 o'clock on that 11th of September. And they were absolutely knackered. They were worn out, they were hungry, and they just pulled up at Chazy landing really for a rest, I guess, and trying to find some food. Well, when they got here, as you probably know from other sources, they were jeered at by the local inhabitants who virtually, were now triumphant. You load of British so-and-sos have been defeated and now you're on your way home, and probably even worse. And he describes the fact that there was some bother. He doesn't say what it was, but it could have been a verbal punch-up, or it could have been fisticuffs, or even worse, we don't know. Anyway, that was the situation. And they had, in fact, some on board this gunboat, there were some dead comrades. So towards midnight they acquired some picks and shovels and they buried these people down near Chazy landing. We don't know exactly where, but it couldn't have been very far inland. And there is, through Bob's efforts, there's a marker down there which is being installed somewhere near the spot that we think that these men were buried. There couldn't have been very many of them, but there were certainly 5, 6, 7, something of that order. So there we are. The British Army is now back in Canada. You can all go back to living your normal lives, except you've got 13 British soldiers to look after. So whether or not they stayed here and there are any relatives alive here today, I don't know. But that's it. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Roy. Roy mentioned the marker at the lake commemorating the soldiers that are buried somewhere down there in a mass grave. Our email conferences back and forth a few times about the wording of the marker. Roy came up with the wording. So those words on that marker are his, and I want to make sure he gets credit for that. They or the blame. And he did. I think he hit it right on, and it makes a good reminder of what happened. As for this marker here, we want to dedicate it to the memory of all the events that went on here, of General Prevost and his officers being headquartered here temporarily, and to Alexander Scott, the man who built the house 200 years ago. There's a bit of information on Alexander in the program, and he was a businessman and an entrepreneur that did quite well in Chazy. He was friends with J.C. Hubble, and the two of them, as the story goes, saddled up their horses and went to Cumberland Head and watched the Battle of Plattsburgh Bay, the naval battle, and then came back home that night. We want to thank Kim and Tim Howley again for taking real good care of this place. It has had good care through the years, and they're continuing to do as much, and it will keep the house going for another 200, we hope, and because we all want to see it in 200 years, I believe. So right now we will end this ceremony, and the school has the concert starting at 7 o'clock. Oh my goodness. You know, you talk about senior moments. I have been having too many of them. Pete Hubble has a story to tell you about his great-great-grandmother, and I'm going to make it easy for him. I'll take this thing down. My apologies, Pete. I guess I want this thing over.
I'll get it over fast. All right. This is a story that has been told by my great-grandfather, John Wolcott Hubble, about his mother and father. After the army of 12,000 men had passed, a general and his staff quartered themselves at this house and agreed with Mother to pay a crown each meal and furnish their own wine, which they did punctually. Mother said they were gentlemen, but soldiers. Just before the Battle of Plattsburgh, at dinner, they were boasting of how they were going to take Plattsburgh and then go on to Albany and further. Mother was patriotic, and being a woman could say such things. "Pooh," she said, "you'll go no further than Plattsburgh. You'll be whipped and you'll soon be galloping back." "Zounds, ma'am," says one of the officers, "if you were a man, I would run my sword through you." The general then said, "Madam, you are very brave. We should be galloping back, as you say. Each officer of my staff shall throw his purse at your feet." Well, sure enough, the morning of the battle, a courier came up hastily and whispered to the general, and soon another came, and then another. And they did not go back, but went on towards Canada. The general and his staff saddled their horses and went hurriedly towards Plattsburgh. Mother overheard one of the couriers say that the British were defeated and were retreating. Mother went behind the door and swung her sunbonnet and silently cheered, fearing to do no more openly. Soon, however, the general and his staff could be heard clattering back, and they were not going to stop. But seeing Mother on the stoop with her sunbonnet in her hand, they suddenly, at some word, halted and lined up in front of the stoop. At the command, "Throw purses," each of the officers threw his purse on the stoop at Mother's feet. Then they saluted, turned towards Canada, and were seen no more. Mother exultantly picked up the purses, in which she found more than $1,000 in gold and silver. And that may be the foundation of the so-called Hubble fortune. Thank you all.
Thank you, Pete. Is my face still as red as that man's shirt over there? Oh, it's beginning to go back. Well, that's good. Well, this will conclude, actually this time, our ceremony. the concert at the school is at 7 o'clock. We hope that you will be able to go. It takes a Plattsburgh, Battle of Plattsburgh button to get in, and that button is good for the whole week for all the events, concerts, and you can go into Israel Green's Tavern and all through the Battle of Plattsburgh. So we hope to see you up there, and all you people that are, if you want, we can have a cannon report. The only thing that we will have to do is have everybody come to the other side of the driveway.
We can't stay seated here.
So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob.
Craig Russell is loading it. It's appropriately headed a little northeast, so he'll be shooting out toward the lake, up toward a little toward Rouse's Point.
I'm waiting for a Canadian license plate.
That trajectory. Make sure there's no state police coming, I guess.
We don't want to have anybody careen.
They don't want to have a vehicle going by when the cannon goes off, because it could be a little shocking to somebody at the wheel, and all of a sudden Route 9 heading south is a very busy highway here through the hamlet of Chazy. Nice first effort here for Bob Cheeseman and company, and a very nice job of research by Roy Carter. And it looks like finger is up. Whoop, no, people are still coming. They're still coming. We've got about 4 vehicles in a row here, and another one coming under the underpass behind him. So we're all patiently awaiting for the heavy Saturday night traffic here, or actually, yeah, Saturday night traffic here in downtown Chazy. It's legendary. Here we go, he's lighting it, and hopefully this vehicle will keep, hurry up ladies. And they kept going. Fortunately they were old enough that they probably didn't hear it anyway. There we go.
I would like to thank the Howleys for their hospitality in allowing us to do this. Not only that, but they also got us a porta-john at their own expense. Which if you're going to go imbibe, you're going to need that. We do that as a mayor, we do thank them.
It's for their own expense and for their own future savings as far as the headaches.
And the top of it.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say, if I had a bunch of men camping on my grounds overnight, I'd put up a porta potty too, just for my own well-being.
Well, I figured that Johnny's porta potty over there couldn't probably take it all, you know.
Not at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Not at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's exactly right.
5 or whatever.
That's exactly right.
Or 7 when they got up.
Right.
Every time.
Yeah.
Who mows the lawn here?
I do.
You do.
I do. Yeah.
You got a new obstruction in the middle of your lawn here, though.
Yes, we do. Yeah, but that's okay. It's nice. My wife's pretty excited about it, and it's nice. So it's nice to have these guys here. It's adds a little history to the local area, and there's a lot. Certainly, as everybody knows, anybody that pays any attention, there's a lot of history in Chazy.
Oh yeah, every step you take from the border on south.
That's exactly right.
For quite a while, I've often thought the history of Route 22 could tell, because a lot of things have happened along that route all the way down to Fort Dan and to
Sure.
Whitehall and so on.
Yeah.
How long have you and Kim owned this, Tim?
Well, we bought this from our father. I don't know, probably 5-6 years ago, and we're in the process of. Well, we've been in the process of trying to fix it up and figuring out exactly what we want to do with it. It's kind of, Kim grew up here and she's very attached to it, and it's tough to give it up.
Well, yeah, obviously, yes.
Yeah. It's a beautiful old home, but it's old, and,
And it takes a lot of.
it takes a lot of maintenance. It takes a lot of energy. Yes, it takes a lot of energy of all kinds.
Okay. You're not selling Mickey fries tonight?
I'm not, but they are. There's a game on. There's a game on tonight.
I'm heading up there right now.
Are you heading up there? Yeah, I'm.
We're in Chazy, so you know there's soccer being played.
I told the boys I'd head up after this to help them out with the second game, so I'll be there selling Mickey fries.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. So we're going to wrap this up here on Route 9 with the town supervisor actually doing some work here. This
Oh
is,
my God! Don't get him on
Let's
camera.
go.
doing that.
The camera's pointing, so Staub's working. As soon as I shut the camera off, you'll leave. And a nice job here done in Chazy, and congratulations to Bob Cheeseman.